Welcome to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Molly Watts. If you want to change your drinking habits and create a peaceful relationship with alcohol, you're in the right place. This podcast explores the strategies I use to overcome a lifetime of family alcohol abuse, more than 30 years of anxiety and worry about my own drinking, and what felt like an unbreakable daily drinking habit. Becoming an alcohol minimalist means removing excess alcohol from your life so it doesn't remove you from life. It means being able to take alcohol or leave it without feeling deprived. It means to live peacefully, being able to enjoy a glass of wine without feeling guilty and without needing to finish the bottle. With science on our side, we'll shatter your past patterns and eliminate your excuses. Changing your relationship with alcohol is possible. I'm here to help you do it. Let's start now. Well, hello and welcome back to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast with me, your host, Molly Watts, coming to you from, I'm going to say it's a melancholy Oregon today. It's rainy, it's cold, kind of windy, mostly just rainy and cold, very typical and gray, of course, typical of Oregon in the wintertime. I know I shouldn't complain because I've had a lot of dry days during the month of January. We're coming out of a mostly dry January here on the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast, not talking about the weather, but with regards to alcohol. And the weather has been cooperating in that way too. So today, if you are listening to this in real time, it is Monday, February 2nd, and I am delighted today to share an interview with you. You know, I thought about it. It's been a hot minute since I've had an interview on the show, and not because I haven't had opportunities, but I just, want to be careful about who I'm having on and really thinking about those options. And so this opportunity was something I just could not pass by. I am talking today with Dr. Charles Knowles, and Dr. Knowles is a professor of surgery at the Queen Mary University of London. He is qualifying as a doctor from the University of Cambridge. He practices as a consultant colorectal surgeon as well. He has authored more than 300 peer-reviewed publications and contributed to several major international surgical textbooks. But that is nothing about what he came on the show to discuss. He has written a book called Why We Drink Too Much: The Impact of Alcohol on Our Bodies and Culture. And it is his first popular science book, and it talks about his own journey through becoming someone who no longer drinks and his sobriety. And he champions the idea now that problematic drinking is not a problem of the weak will or low moral integrity. And he believes that the term alcoholic should really no longer be seen as a dirty word and revealed only anonymously. Much like me, he wants to move the needle on people getting help sooner. And this book, I hope, will help some of you do just that with regards to learning about alcohol, this is very science forward. So of course it really resonated with me, and there's a lot to be taken away from his own personal journey. And like I said, lots of very good science in this book. I will link it in the show notes, Why We Drink Too Much: The Impact of Alcohol on Our Bodies and Culture. Here is my conversation with Dr. Charles Knowles.
Good afternoon, Charles, because it is, in fact, afternoon there in the UK. It's morning here in the US where I am. But no matter what time, I appreciate you taking the time to be on the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me to the show, Molly.
Absolutely. You're here because you have written a great book that I really want people to become familiar with and hopefully explore. Why We Drink Too Much: The Impact of Alcohol on Our Bodies and Culture. And first of all, that's a big title. That's a big proposition to endeavor upon. And so let's talk a little bit about what your goals were, how you came to write this book, kind of your story and what led to it, and what you're really hoping the book will achieve for people.
Okay. So, yes, well, the book started out actually in a completely different form. It started out as a memoir.
Okay.
And the memoir was the idea of my music producer, who I worked with, Nick Tauber, who produced Thin Lizzy, Marillion, a few other bands. And sitting in the studio recording things, obviously you go over many stories. And he said, "Oh, you should write a book." So with this mad idea, I started writing a book. In fact, I finished writing a memoir. And I showed it to a few people, including literary agents, who said, "Well, it's not bad, but you'll never sell a memoir because unless you're a major celebrity. But the stuff you've written on alcohol is really interesting." So I went away, and being that sort of person, I thought I must then write a book on alcohol. So it was back to square one. And I'm very good friends with Dr. Andrew Jenkinson, who wrote the book Why We Eat Too Much. And so that's where the title came from.
Gotcha.
The best-selling book. And yes, and I set off writing a book that started out, because of its origins in a memoir, of really being about my journey, and particularly what I call the why me question, which is, why of all the people I grew up with, many of whom were heavier drinkers than me, crazier drinkers than me, did I end up developing alcohol dependence and all the problems that that's caused when they didn't. And many of them could take it or leave it despite, considerable consumption. And what I realized on starting to evaluate that was that question couldn't be answered without looking at a second question, which is why humans consume alcohol at all.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, that question, of course, expands to the rest of the animal kingdom as well. Why do animals consume alcohol? Because many of them do. And so the book then became an exploration of why we drink, and really why some people are at a risk of having a greater loss of control than others. And I can tell you that those two questions together are not simple to answer.
No.
And there were many times in writing the book where I regretted starting it because of the complexity of it, and because of the need to integrate things that fell well outside my comfort zone. So whereas, medicine and neuroscience I can deal with, but by the time we got into sort of sociology, anthropology, history, psychology, that was, there was a lot to read and digest. So that's how I came to write the book.
I love that. I appreciate the fact that you already set a stage for the fact that this question, why me, and the answer that potentially you were looking for is complicated, right? It's not a one size and not a one answer fits all. And I think that's what I appreciated. I appreciate the fact there's a lot of science in your book. Everybody around here at Alcohol Minimalist knows that I'm a science nerd, and I like the science. I like the science for a lot of reasons. And one of the most important reasons is that I used science myself to help guide and change my narrative that I had had for a long time around alcohol. I often give the example of the fact that I, for a long time, believed that I needed to drink to relax and unwind. When I did not understand the neuroscience of it all, and the fact that, just I think in your book you say it, everything that goes up must come down, and it's the fact that the rebound effect of over drinking is the excitatory neurotransmitters. And so I never understood that. And once I understood that, it became easier for me to challenge my own narrative. So this book you wrote after the fact. When I say after the fact, I mean after you became sober. So let's talk about that a little bit, because when you were changing your relationship with alcohol, it doesn't sound like it was based in science as much as it was for me, but I found science very helpful. In writing this book, did you go back and you realize along the way, like, okay, this science actually supports things that I made decisions around, and it definitely supports what I've done?
Yeah. So the answer to that is yes, the short answer. I think that there isn't a necessity for everyone to address the why me question at all.
Mm-hmm.
And amongst those of us who have addressed it, there isn't a necessity to address it through science. And that will suit some people and not others, depending, and I think actions are more important than thinking very often in certainly people suffering from alcohol dependence. It's difficult to think your way out of a thinking problem, and it is a thinking problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting on with, you've had a background of cognitive behavioral therapy, etc., getting on with things that are actually a program that involves action and work is, often more important than solely thinking about it. A. Gill describes this beautifully in his book, Poor Me, the why me question, which he addressed, quite a long time into sobriety, as I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever read his book, but it starts with the two boats. A. Gill's a journalist and author in the UK, writes absolutely beautifully. I mean, I'm not a patch on his quality of English literature, but his book starts with two boats. You're stranded at sea in a small boat being tossed around by the waves, and the sharks are circling, and you're awaiting your eventual end, and you're visited by two boats, and one of the boats will take you to safety and the other will tell you how you got there. and you can only choose one of them. And I think for many people, there's an element of choosing the boat that takes you to safety before you worry about how you got there.
Sure.
And certainly that was my experience. And so, but I think, on the other hand, I have met people whose whole recovery has been based around understanding the science of why they drank and developed the problems they did. And there's been a play doing the circuits in the UK in theatre houses called The White Ship. And The White Ship is exactly about a person who finds a solution, who has tried AA and all other things, but actually finds a solution from understanding their brain and the neuroscience that's in my book and you've mentioned. So I think there are many different roads to Rome here. But certainly I couldn't have, I'm a scientist by background. I was always struggling to answer that question. It just didn't help me very much early on, I don't think. We joke in AA, and I am a person who's benefited from AA, and I fully appreciate that your audience will include people who like or don't like AA, or and I'm not here to advertise it, so it doesn't suit everyone. But in AA there isn't a chapter why it works. How it works describes the 12 steps.
Yeah.
But there is no chapter in the AA Big Book that describes how their program actually works in the brain. Although actually the principles of AA are across now a number of, all successful programs of changing thinking are pretty much based around the same thing, around changes in cognition. And social support, etc., which of course were first embodied by the AA program in 1939. So, that's really. So I'm completely open. To different perspectives on that question.
Let's talk about so that we set everybody up to understand your journey. And I'm curious too, as we go into this. I know that you kind of explored and found different aspects, both genetically and upbringing and psychologically, things that you believe kind of fueled your path. Before we get there, I want to ask you, because this is something that I've long held as a belief regarding alcohol dependence, and that is that you don't become physically dependent before first you become psychologically dependent. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So this is about the reward to relief shift. And I think that's pretty well accepted, that the first problem ultimately comes down to really liking it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really like something, you learn to do it and you reinforce it much more than someone who likes it just a little bit. And that is certainly the starting point of dependence. Later on, and of course, where the real problems arise, is where alcohol becomes a solution to the withdrawal from alcohol.
Right. The physical
and where
dependence.
it is required for relief, as well as for, and often the reward aspect of alcohol has long gone by then, almost solely drinking for relief. And of course, that is an incredibly strong driver of drinking. I mean, anyone who's experienced alcohol withdrawal, and I have more times than I care to mention, it's a horrible situation. You know, your brain will think of nothing else at all other than the obsession to have another drink. It's incredibly difficult to overcome, and physically, you know, the fear, anxiety, sweating, palpitations, everything. And I think, you know, classic alcohol dependence and alcoholism, which is a word that I don't object to, and I describe myself as a recovering alcoholic. Again, not something that's essential or liked by everyone, but I think it says what's in the can. And in a way that, for instance, describing that I'm suffering from a severe alcohol use disorder doesn't, you know, right. When someone gives you a drink. The alcoholism is that compulsion to drink, you know, a sometimes fatal disorder characterized by a compulsion to consume alcohol despite harm, the basic definition of alcoholism or alcohol dependence. That compulsion is mainly based, I think, in its latter stages around withdrawal phenomena and relief drinking rather than reward, because the reward is long gone.
Right. And I think it's important to mention, so this audience, you know, this is not, if you believe that you are physically dependent, and I know that you say this in the book as well, it's very possible that someone that has developed a physical dependence on alcohol will require medical support to try to change that relationship or break that drinking pattern. And so this show really isn't intended for people that believe they have a physical dependence. It's really more, we're trying to catch people during that psychological dependence, because it's very progressive. And if you don't change that habit, when you have, it's very possible to slip to physical dependence. And so that's, you know, I just want to make sure, folks, you understand that if you're listening to this.
I mean, and for the audience, let's be clear, there's only 2 to 3% of adult populations in the West have alcohol dependence as a medical condition, right. Whereas there's the what's often termed grey area drinking now, but has other the hazardous alcohol use with what I call a reliance on alcohol, which we might say is a psychological dependence, is much more common, 20%. Just to pick you up on one thing, and I touch on this in my book, and I can't say that I could categorically prove it, but I think it will be proven, is that one of the things that separates people in terms of risk of alcohol dependence is that there are a lot of people who will never develop withdrawal phenomena, because some of the biological differences between people that pose a risk are actually in changes in the brain that promote the physical dependence. I say in the book, we don't all have the same internal electrician in the brain when it comes to the rewiring. And I think there are people like myself that were prone to that rewiring, and others that never will be, however much they consume.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, very small percentage, I'm sure, of people that would fit into that description, but still worth paying attention to. And I think
we're still trying to modify behavior.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Chance. Yeah. I'm not suggesting people carry on to find out. No, but,
I think, and I liked one of the things in your book that I also appreciated. First, I mean, there's a lot of things that I appreciate, folks. I'm going to link this book in my show notes, and I would really highly recommend you go out and read it yourselves. The thing that you made it pretty simple for people to look at, because we're right here in the middle. I'm recording this the middle of dry January. sober, mostly dryuary, what do you want to call it? We do a mostly dry January around here. I talk a lot about progress, not perfection, always trying to prioritize alcohol-free days. And you talked about the 3 dimensions, the C's of drinking, as being a really good test or a really good kind of marker for people if they are looking at their own relationship with alcohol. Those 3 C's might be a good place to start. Can you describe for my audience what those 3 C's are?
Yes, I can. So the 3 C's are consumption, consequences, and control. And I think many people, there's an enormous fascination with the amount we consume.
Right? Always trying to quantify it. How much can I have? How much can I have?
Yeah. And I mean, I've noticed this recently in the sort of news headlines of pieces that I've been, in the papers. They're just obsessed with the amount I drank.
Right.
The alcohol. So anyway, so the amount we consume is actually really a very poor indicator in many ways of the real problems of drinking alcohol. Mm-hmm. We all know people who can drink heavily and they're right as rain, take it or leave it. If they had to stop, the doctor turned around and said, "You've got a touch of fatty liver." "Oh, just stop, it's fine."
Right.
I know people like that in the music industry and things, who drink with the best of them but could just stop. And then there are people who, so it is worth, of course, looking at consumption against, government safe limits, etc.
Right.
But of course, that's not easy because we all define units differently. Like in the US, you have the standard drink, that's 14 grams of alcohol. Our unit is 8 grams. In most of the world, it's 10 grams. And all governments have different limits, ranging hugely.
Yes. And there's tables in the books, everybody.
Yeah, they're tabled in the appendix.
Lots of good. If you're a data person, you want to see all that, it's here. Sorry, go ahead.
But I think the amount we consume is important from the long-term chronic health consequences of alcohol. Here, I'm not talking so much about the brain, but about the body. Mm-hmm. So obviously, amount consumed has a relationship with being overweight or obese and the metabolic changes in the body. It has a relationship with heart disease, but particularly stroke and high blood pressure. It has a relationship with the risk of cancer, particularly breast cancer and bowel cancer. And I could go on with a long list. So it's important from that point of view. But I suspect that only a fraction of the people on your show are worried about developing liver disease or heart disease. They're here because actually what they're really worried about is the consequence. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things that characterizes grey area drinking, or what the World Health Organization would describe as hazardous alcohol use. That is that in the back of our minds somewhere, there is a niggling feeling that this really isn't doing us any good. Mm-hmm. And that there are a few things that might not have happened yet, but could happen if this persisted. So I haven't crashed the car yet. I haven't lost my marriage yet. I've turned up irritable or late to work with a hangover, but I haven't lost my job yet. And there are a number of yets. Mm-hmm. And we then get in a situation of sort of cognitive dissonance, that there's one side of the brain going, "Go on, have another drink, be all right. Your mates do it." And there's another side of the brain going, "I really shouldn't." And the grey area drinking sort of area of the population describes these phenomena. And so it is worth taking out a piece of paper and saying, what are the pros of my drinking versus the cons? What really are the consequences here? Mm-hmm. Does my skin look good? Am I really feeling great? Am I doing enough exercise? Or have I got a hangover? You could write a long list, and that's the second C. Mm-hmm. The third C is control, as I've said. And this is really an area where I think someone can put it to the test. So let's just say that the first column shows a level of consumption that you're not terribly happy about and is over the safe limits. And the second column shows a number of things we're worried about. Then that's fine. Okay, just stop drinking for a while. Maybe try January, maybe It doesn't have to be January, but any time. Then you find it's not as easy a habit to break as you thought it might be. And there we're into the third C, control. Mm-hmm. And control has, on one end, white, neutrality around alcohol, the ability just to be able to take it or leave it. The black is alcohol dependence, or in old man's terms, alcoholism. And the grey area is in the middle. And what I've described for the first time is term alcohol reliance, because currently the medical profession and psychology totally disenfranchise this middle group. Grey area drinking is not a medical term. You will not find it anywhere. If you went to your doctor and said, I'm a grey area drinker, you would just be looked at.
Right.
Blank expression. But this is important because, as I've already said, it's probably 20% of adult populations fall in this group. And so I've described this term alcohol reliance. It's I rely on a drink generally in certain situations after work to de-stress or to socialize, or, and I give a list of the most common descriptions that people use in the book that I rely on a drink to. Hence, I've used the word alcohol reliance. And I think grey area drinking, which I define really in a scientific way for the first time in the book, is a person who relies on alcohol in a way that they've come to worry about the consequences of their consumption and their ability to control it.
Yeah.
And that encompasses the 3 C's.
I like that.
I think we would probably find that many of your audience would consider they fell in that group.
Without question. I mean, that is the people that I really focus on, and the people that are here listening, and people that are listening and that have been listening for a while to my show will recognize kind of the characteristics of alcohol reliance as being very similar to what I call the alcohol core beliefs. I say alcohol, the ACBs, they are as I described to you, the belief that I needed to drink to relax and unwind. And so that kind of core belief drives that habitual behavior. And so that automatic behavior, right? The behavior that we've stopped questioning, the behavior that we just do. And I think that's, I know that you would agree with me on this. One of the real beauties of things that have happened in the world, at least in my opinion, over the last 5 years, maybe longer than that, but certainly in the last 5 years, is this new shift towards sober, curious actions and exploration of relationships with alcohol while people are in this. They may not have the words for it, the gray area drinker. That's something that's still pretty new in the zeitgeist, but it is definitely coming around. But I think the idea of being sober curious and being a mindful drinker and actually looking at the relationship with alcohol is something that we should all be really grateful for, because it's certainly taking people in a new direction that I don't think maybe existed 5 or so plus years ago.
I totally agree with you on all points.
Hey, just a quick break to talk with you for a minute about Sunnyside. You hear me talk about it on the show often, and it really is my number one recommendation for a mindful drinking app. People use this tool in my groups, in my classes, and they tell me all the time how much they really appreciate the fact that Sunnyside is a very positive reinforcement. And what I mean by that is that when you track your drinks, and let's just say you planned for 1 drink and you ended up having 2. If you're honest and you track that second drink, you're not going to get a message that shames you in any way or reprimands you. You're actually going to get positive reinforcement for tracking a drink that you didn't plan on, and some ideas and some suggestions for maybe going and grabbing a snack or getting some water. Sunnyside is like having a coach in your pocket, and I love that. You can try it for a 15-day free trial. Go to www.sunnyside.co/Molly to get started today.
And I mean, when I think back to when I was young, compared with the youth of today, I mean, there's been a sea change. I don't think I knew anyone who didn't drink.
Well, and you UK folks, you guys that I've talked to, I know on the back of your book you have a quote from Will Porter, and I've talked to William Porter, I've talked to Claire Pooley. I mean, there is definitely a culture around young youth drinking in the UK that I feel like is maybe was a little bit even more permissive than the United States.
Yeah. No, it is. And I mean, the figures bear that out. We do have more problem with alcohol in the UK, at least more of us drink regularly in the UK than I think it's 80% of adults in the UK and 65% in the US.
Yeah, not to say that, like I said, there's plenty of people in both pools that can benefit from looking at changing their relationship with alcohol. One of the things that I also appreciated about this book is that many books come at this question from a real black or white perspective. You either are or you're not. You're very, and that the solution for everyone is simply to not drink. Like, that's the way we solve this. We don't drink. And therefore, why isn't everybody just not drinking? And I appreciated the fact that you were very careful to say that there is no one solution fits all, and there's room for all of us, because for me personally, and I've said this many times on the show, people have heard me, it's like I did not feel capable, or the thought when I tried to think I'll never drink again, that very thought, like I can never have a drink again, would prevent me from doing anything. It would prevent me from trying it all. And so my approach was different than yours, but I also never got to the point where I think that, and we never really touched on this, your story, but you got to a rock, kind of what you would have described maybe as a rock bottom point. Not that everybody needs to wait that long, but for you, do you think that you got there, that it needed to get there?
Yeah, I do. I mean, to come back to your earlier point, it's not just something I've written in the book. I firmly am not anti-alcohol.
Right.
I think there is room for alcohol in society. I think people should be educated. As adults or children, starting from childhood, we should be afforded the opportunity to make a rational decision whether we wish to do it, based on having more information than we're given at the moment. And certainly there are, governments and the alcohol industry have not done a great deal in this regard. And alcohol is widely accepted and completely normalized. As a way of living,
and almost glamorized in many ways, right? I mean, there's I talk a lot about that, about the stories, the narratives that are driven both by big alcohol.
I was alcohol dependent. I needed to get to rock bottom before this was going to change. But I mean, that is not a path I would recommend anyone else taking. It was not much fun at all. But I think there's a middle road, and I think people should be sober curious, have a look, don't accept just what you grew up with or were told, and have an approach to looking at this. You've had William Porter on the show. William Porter is amongst the people I would describe as being evangelical about. I know Sam very well. I know, and he's a friend of mine, but we would disagree on his approach.
No, and he came on and we did disagree. I mean, we talked about it, but what I appreciate about William is that he is open to having that conversation, because we both believe that having the conversation and continuing to explore both sides is what helps more people. So, and that we can completely agree.
And he has helped a lot of people.
100%. 100%.
And his books have certainly rung a chord with many people who they've helped great. I mean, I just think the fundamental of why humans have had the relationship they've had with alcohol, starting as a foodstuff in our ancestors millions of years ago, but 15,000 years of deliberate alcohol manufacture, is that fundamentally, for most people, it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not wish to rid the world of having any fun with alcohol.
Right.
It's that is at its heart. Alcohol has psychostimulatory effects that are basically fun, and the behavior that can be derived from that for people is often regarded as pleasing, and therefore reinforces the behavior, and we learn to drink on that basis.
Yeah, I share a lot about the actual therapeutic effect of alcohol being very limited, with the blood alcohol content being from 0 to 0.055%. And the problem is that we try to chase that number, and we chase it by drinking more, which of course raises our blood alcohol content, which then just has a propensity for all the negative consequences that come from drinking, right? And so that's why the show is called Alcohol Minimalist, because really the answer is that drinking less is better, and there is really no situation where drinking more is going to improve your consequences, improve your outcomes, right? It's just not. And if you really want to include alcohol in your life, if you want to include it, and if you are not someone that has developed a physical dependence, then you're going to want to minimize it. So
yeah. I mean, one thing to be clear is I think people like me who have developed alcohol dependence, I think 99.9% of the medical profession, psychiatrists, support organizations and things would agree that you can never safely drink again. Right. But as I've mentioned, we are a small proportion of the population.
You have in the book, you have, by which you say is not a homage to AA, but you have 12 guiding principles, not the 12 steps, but you have 12 guiding principles. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of the things that you wrote that I really liked, and it's the guiding principle number 9, and it says abstinence, neutrality, and sobriety are not the same thing. And in it, you say sobriety is a state of mind that embodies both neutrality and the achievement of some form of serenity or peace. It denotes a state of mind exhibited by people who have achieved a successful, balanced life with aspects of mental, physical, and spiritual health. And yes. I say that's what I say here. I talk about having a peaceful relationship with alcohol. I think that one of the things that that's why I think I went the path that I've done, is people often equate sobriety and abstinence with that feeling of peace. And what I would posit to you, and I would ask for your opinion on, is, was it the abstinence that brought you peace, or was it what you've done with regards to the exploration of understanding how you got there and really coming into a whole new practice of mindfulness and all the things that you've built after achieving and understanding that for you, because you were physically dependent, you had to remove the alcohol to even get to a point where you could do all this work, right? I talk about doing the work underneath. We have to understand what drives us personally and fix what's there to be able, if we don't do that, then it's potential that we'll just change to another form of coping.
Yeah. So it won't surprise you, the answer to that question is that abstinence brought me 7 years of misery.
Okay.
Yeah. So abstinence without trying to address a change in thinking and achieve some form of peace with myself is a very, very difficult position to be in.
Right.
And was the worst years of my thing, even though I wasn't drinking very much. But it was the yo-yoing back and forth and the mental health consequences of not drinking while still having the desire to drink and not resolving any of those other problems. You raise an interesting perspective. Can someone be sober and still drinking? I think the answer to that question comes back from the origin of the word sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
And the origin of the word sobriety can be traced back, over 1,000 years, and is used actually in English literature for the Knights of King Arthur. I mean, to give you an idea of how far back it goes.
Yeah.
And I suspect they were drinking.
Mm-hmm.
King Arthur is described as being sober of mind. It's used by Shakespeare. It's used by Thomas Hardy. And these, not in the context of being alcohol free,
Mm-hmm.
but of being of sober mind.
Emotionally sober. Is that the
emotionally
kind of
sober?
Yeah.
Now, in grey area drinking communities, they use the term emotional sobriety to denote a state that develops once the drink has been put down.
Mm-hmm.
In AA, that's just called sobriety.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So in AA, you would not describe someone who had stopped drinking as being sober. Most people have stopped drinking when they come to an AA meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Getting sober is the next year's work.
Okay.
So that you can be neutral around alcohol and that the will to drink is no longer there because some form of serenity has been achieved. And if I look at my life, when I first came across the word serenity, which people mostly don't unless you go to AA, because it's not a word that's commonly used in the language, I realized that I had never had any inner peace ever in my life until I found that eventually, where suddenly I realized, wow, I actually feel okay. And the desire to drink has never, ever come back.
I think
and so it's much more than stopping drinking.
Right. And now I've done plenty of extended periods of being alcohol free. I do them regularly or I do them pretty frequently, I should say. And I have many alcohol free days each week. And so the alcohol has become kind of a non-factor in that regard of my life. But I do believe that I would have never gotten here had I not been willing to explore how the whole emotional resilience, emotional sobriety, that part, the connection. And I talk a lot about how our thoughts drive our feelings, which drive our actions and get the results that we have in our lives. But the feelings part, the feelings right there, it's at the center of our lives. We focus so much on our emotional state but we don't really understand it very well. We don't understand how we get there. And we also don't understand how much agency we have in determining how that plays out. We blame a lot of our lives on the circumstances and don't really understand how much agency we have. So I think that that's the difference, right? I think that's what helps people actually, and it's whether you change the, become somebody who drinks not at all, or certainly somebody that no longer drinks on a habitual pattern basis or regularly. The doing that work, understanding the underlying part is what eventually will bring the peace.
Yeah. I mean, I think every program, whether you seek to be alcohol free in the long term, to moderate or anything else, the principles of sobriety or emotional sobriety are the same, that there are 3 established pillars and probably a 4th one. The 3 established pillars are cognitive, a change in thinking, social, a change in social support, and the 3rd is addressing the underpinning psychological drivers of why you were drinking or exacting the behavior in the first place. And the 4th one is spiritual, which helps some people and not necessarily everyone.
In the back of the book, you talk about the myths of AA. And one of the things that I think people often attribute AA to being is a religious organization, and as opposed to a spiritual organization. And I think that delineation is important. So I appreciate you putting that in the book. I think that whether it's a greater being or just being more mindful and meditating and being in touch with your own, the own spirituality, I guess, for lack of a better definition, is something that I do believe helps everybody. And certainly something that you wrote, and this is the very end of your book, you talk about being asked about having regrets, about regrets for the road that you took. And you said that from my own perspective, my experience of rock bottom and what I have learned in recovery have brought me a new level of humility and peace that I might not have ever found without it. So talk to me about that in terms of just as this final words on this conversation. What has your life changed? How, in this last 10 years, how has your life changed in terms of the humility, the peace, and where that confluence of all of, all the past and now the present comes together into what you are hoping, what you believe about the world and where you are with it?
How to unpick that question. I mean, what it's brought me is I think, a perspective on my life and who I am that I didn't have before. And that perspective obviously is mirrored in my relationships with other people, including my wife, my children, my friends, my professional career. I think I'm a better doctor because of the empathy and humility I've gained from this experience. Carl Jung said that it's the wounded doctor that heals. And there's sort of no area of my life that's gone untouched. Now, that's not to say that life is perfect beyond that. Of course, it isn't. Shit still happens to people. I've had operations, I've had other things. I'm still treated for depression. I still have ADHD. Those sort of things have to are still present in my life, and they always will be, probably. But peace is an incredibly important thing, and it's not until you get it you realize you never had it. I mean, that is the extraordinary thing about it. And one of the things that, of course, I started drinking as a teenager, and I stopped in my 40s for the first, eventually. The good 30 years of drinking in that. And one of the other perspectives here, particularly for people like me who've been drinking a long time, is that you may not actually know who you are. And this is a thing that people don't talk about, because the last actual sober version or non-alcohol affected version of you was when you were a teenager. Every relationship, interaction, things has been shaped. Our very lives have been shaped by the relationship with alcohol. And I think it didn't find its way into the book because the editor didn't like it, but I did have the quote from Shakespeare in there, that who is it who can tell me who I am, which is a quote from King Lear. And the fool says, you are your own shadow. And I think one of the important things is for people to, in looking back, is to not just be the person they're not. So, I am no longer my drinking persona. That makes me no one. So finding who you really are is something that can be achieved out of the other side of this. And I just think that's very difficult to do if you're still drinking substantially. It's one of the reasons that I think, regardless of anyone's ultimate aims in modifying their relationship with alcohol, a period of being alcohol-free is incredibly helpful to gain some perspective on things, and then that continues. But you described it as the work. The work, the work hasn't stopped for me.
Yeah, I don't. I think that's the. I say that all the time. That's what I think the beauty of when I say the work. This change, this kind of change that for me really wasn't just. I say it all the time. It's about becoming a better thinker. It's becoming a better mind manager. It's actually learning how to work with my brain and not against it. And that whole phase, I mean, that is a lifelong journey, right? I hope that I always want to keep evolving into a better version of myself and into becoming and realizing that I have the agency to do that, and not believing my self-limiting beliefs, not believing the narratives that I had held on to for so long. And I think that is what is on the other side of changing a habit that no longer serves you, whether it's a drinking habit or any other habit that is of consumption that is taking you away from being, from finding out who you really are, right? So I love that. And Dr. Charles Knowles, thank you so much for spending time with me here on the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. If people want to learn more about you, is there a place where they should head look for you?
Yes. So, well, at the moment, it's pretty much the book and other podcasts and other available resources. But with my wife's assistance, we are developing a website that will have a number of other resources on it, including Q&A and addressing topics. And I'm hoping that I will do a scientific update on it every few months. So new scientific papers that I think move the needle from journals like The Lancet or Nature on addiction and other things. I'll write a short summary. I'll read them and write a short summary on that for people.
Wonderful. Well, when that becomes live, you'll let me know. I will definitely update my listeners and readers with it. And I just, again, appreciate you taking the time. I'll put everything in the show notes, folks. And Dr. Charles Knowles, thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Take something you learned from this week's episode and put it into action. Changing your drinking habits and creating a peaceful relationship with alcohol is 100% possible. You can stop worrying, stop feeling guilty about overdrinking, and become someone who desires alcohol less. I work with people in 2 different ways, and you can learn about them over at my website. Go to www.mollywatts.com/workwithme or reach out to me directly. Shoot me an email, molly@mollywatts.com. We'll jump on a call and decide what might work best for you. This podcast is really just the beginning of our conversation. Let's keep it going. If there's one thing I know, it's that change is way easier when you stop trying to do it alone.